Okay, welcome back. So, a couple of thoughts as we're moving through the Nevi'im, or the former prophets. A couple of things that I want to point out to you is that when we are moving through Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, what we're doing here is we're very much building a construct of how we are to understand the role of the state and how we are to understand the role of God in how these two relate to one another, and how you, as a member of the community, are supposed to relate to any of this. You are going to live under a divinely ordered monarchy, not a theocracy where God is king, but instead a divinely ordered monarchy where God decides who the king is. And so everything that's being said in these books is kind of leading up to the inauguration of David as king, and it will continually reinforce this as a decision not of the people, but of God. And that seems like a curious thing. So I would kind of rewind to the first king that the nation of Israel has is Saul, who is visited by the prophet Samuel, or the truth teller Samuel, and Samuel seems very reluctant. I mean, Samuel is outright telling the people, you don't want this, you don't want a king, you don't actually want to do that. And how much of that Samuel is saying in terms of like cultural criticism or cultural critique as an opinion maker, as an opinion sharer, a talking head of his time? How much of that is him kind of looking at the people and saying, you don't actually want that, get out of here? And how much of that is him speaking as an agent and representative of God and saying, no, you don't know where this is about to go, you do not want this? Remains to be debated. This is, as we've been discussing, a matter of interpretation. So much of what is in the Bible is subject to interpretation. I would say, because I said this just a couple of days ago, y'all know, as I've said, I talked through these same broad strokes with a church here in New Orleans, talking about literary criticism, how we read the Bible. And one of the things that I said to them is that everything that you would claim as theology, every theological or religious claim that you can make on the basis of the Bible, is just a matter of interpretation. How do I know? Well, because if we're looking at something like the Christian scriptures, there is no discussion of the Trinity, and there's just nothing. There are members or pieces of the expressions of God that take shape in the Christian scriptures. It's not called the Trinity. And so where did this concept of the Trinity come from? If you grew up Catholic, if you grew up Protestant, if you grew up evangelical, you're familiar with this word that the Trinity is God and Jesus and the Spirit of God, and these are three in one, one in three. And yet the Bible doesn't say anything like that. So where did this come from? It's a matter of interpretation. And for many Christians, the Trinity is a foundational doctrine. Like, to say that there is no such thing as the Trinity, you're no longer a Christian. So much of what we talk about in terms of theology is a matter of interpretation. And so much of what we talk about in terms of history is also a matter of interpretation. In terms of our politics, we definitely know that that is a matter of interpretation. And yet in these stories, what we see is that all three of these are kind of weaving together, and they're creating some new narrative. To what end? To what purpose? So we're moving through Joshua. We're moving through the books of Judges. After Joshua, there are other leaders. We don't exactly have a nation. We're kind of, waddling to that point. When we get to 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, we see it. We see where this thing was always going to be headed. It's a divine monarchy. God chooses who the king will be. And then, of course, you can't say anything against the king because the king was appointed by God, right? Here, I would turn our attention to another school of criticism, Marxist criticism. And before we get too far, whenever I say Marxist criticism, students will often say, oh, well, you're trying to make us into communists. No, I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to get you to understand the tenets of Marxism and the tenets of Marxist criticism in particular, in the ways in which Marxism will question power structures, economics, and kind of see how our politics are informed by our economics, and our economics are informed by our politics. apart from any labels, if you are one of those individuals who would say, I think that there are too many wealthy people who are controlling the decisions that our government makes. Our government in America is for the people, by the people. It's us. It's the little people who should be deciding what happens with our government. All these special interest groups, all of these big governments, all these billionaires, all these tech people who are coming in and making decisions for our government, they don't represent us. The people who we elect should represent us, not the billionaires, not this higher class. If you at any point agree with any of that, congratulations, you have just participated in Marxist criticism. That doesn't make you a Marxist. It doesn't make you a communist. It makes you someone who has a brain and can see what's happening in the world around you. You can see this relationship between our politics and our money and how these are threaded together. When we add another layer to this, like religion, as we can kind of see on our news headlines right now, this can get kind of unstable pretty quickly. So, in terms of Marxist criticism, we're not talking about Karl Marx as a historical figure. We're not talking about the activity of the Marxist groups and movements. Instead, what we're talking about is the ways in which we are able to identify the role of government and the role of money and how these two kind of shake one another's hands, okay? There is definitely a moral dialectic here, or there is a moral discussion to be had here. I want to focus your attention on the questions of Marxism, and then I want us to jump back in very briefly into the Nevi'im. So you'll see some typical questions of Marxist criticism, such as, whom does it benefit if the work or the effort is accepted and successful? What is the social class of the author? Which class does the work claim to represent? What values does it reinforce? What values does it subvert or set aside or challenge or eradicate? What conflict can be seen between the values the work champions and those that it portrays? What social classes do the characters represent? And how do the characters from different classes interact or conflict with one another? And here I would bring these questions to bear on the Nevi'im into the first half of the Nevi'im anyway, with our former prophets, our early prophets of Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then 1st and 2nd Kings. In other words, what I'm asking here is, like, how is this narrative of a nation, how is this narrative that is being constructed about what an ideal government looks like in light of people who are going to obey the laws of God, embody the laws of God, and enforce the laws of God? What does that look like? The Marxist critic would look at all this and say, well, who's benefiting from all this? You know, like, apart from what is a good law and a bad law, this stuff about like how long you should cut your hair and whether you should have tattoos, how you should cut your meat and what kind of meat you can eat, if any at all. These seem like small expressions of a larger system. And what is the system? Like, who is this benefiting? In other words, I myself do not own cattle, but I've worked for people who do have cattle. And if they were to come to me and they were to say, man, you gotta have meat, you gotta have it with every meal, you gotta have meat with every meal, I don't think it would take too strong of a brain to figure out that what's happening there is that they're going to financially benefit if I eat more meat. If they are milk producers, if they're milk producing cows, for example, or goats, and they're saying, man, you got to have milk. You got to have milk with cereal. You got to have milk with every meal. It doesn't really take too strong of a brain to figure out that they are going to financially benefit if I am consuming more milk, right? In the same ways, like, who is benefiting from the cultural practices, from how long my hair is, how I eat my meat, what kind of clothes I wear? There are laws in the Torah about what kind of clothes you can wear. Not just like how long they should be, but like what kind of fabrics can and cannot be woven together. A Marxist critic would look at all this and say, all of this seems like a bunch of a waste of time. Like, at the end of this, who is financially benefiting from this? Who is culturally benefiting from this? And it is not always an economic thing, like, well, it makes sense that the cattle owners and the milk producers would want me to eat more meat and milk. Sometimes it reinforces a cultural value. In my father's lifetime and in my lifetime, my father says that he grew up at a time when men having long hair, that was something that his parents would make fun of. He said when he was in college and when he went to Vietnam and when he came back, he had long hair. He didn't have it while he was enlisted and in the service, but as soon as he got off the boat, he said, I started to grow my hair. He said it was about a year before he saw his dad. At that point, he had long hair, and he said, as soon as he saw his dad said, "Why do you have long hair? What are you, a girl?" And so this kind of reinforces a value at the time of what it means to be a guy, your masculinity in America, and the values. If you were in the service and you have very short hair, you really can't have long hair, because not only is that impractical in terms of the military, but also it presents a value that the military does not embody. So what I'm getting at here is not just the historicity of how a man wears his hair, but instead the norms and the values that are being reinforced by a culture. Who would benefit from those cultures? Who would benefit from a heteronormative society? Who would benefit from a militaristic society where everything is homogenous, where everything is the same? Basically the people who can keep it the same, right? Not only culturally, but economically, not only economically, but culturally. And not only economically and culturally, but also in terms of religion. We see this in 2025 there are so many churches that are against so many things. Why are they against those things? There are churches that are for things. Why are they for those things? What values are they supporting? What values are they suppressing, denying, and perhaps eradicating? This is something that the Marxist would want to pay attention to. When we jump back into the Nevi'im, into the early prophets, we see this page after page, story after story, that there are values that are being reinforced about what it means to be a good person, what it means to be a member of the tribe, a member of the people of God. And anytime that someone deviates from that, they're outside the system. And at that point, it doesn't matter what happens to them. They can be erased from the story entirely. But when they live into the story, we celebrate them, we elevate them, we, in a sense, redeem them. How do I know this? Well, you'll recall that there is this person that is named very briefly in the Torah as the people are exiting Egypt and they are moving into the Promised Land, by the name of Rahab. And Rahab is considered a harlot, or someone who sells their body for money. And Rahab fits into the story because she has met some of the people of God, she likes what she sees, and she helps them defeat this one city, or I should say overthrow this one city, by helping them to get inside the city and then destroy it from within. And so Rahab is not at all living into the values that are named in the Torah. She is someone who is selling her body for money. That is forbidden according to the Torah. And yet when she does that, she is a sinner. She is a bad person. She is outside of the system, outside of the laws. She can be destroyed. But because she helps them militarily, because she helps them politically, because she helps them culturally, none of that matters. Her life before all of that doesn't matter, and she becomes part of this story. And not only does she become part of the story, but she is one of the ancestors of King David, who will become heir to the throne, who will become the leader of the nation. At some point, this person's story got washed all over, and it was repurposed. The story was recasted entirely, and what happened before doesn't matter. We will see this looking forward. In the book of Kings, we see the depiction of a foreign leader by the name of Jezebel. She is the queen of a nation. She will kind of be brought into the nation, and she is, again, like Rahab, an outsider. But unlike Rahab, she will not abide by those laws, and because of that, she will eventually die. Furthermore, when we get into the stories, we get into a story named Esther. And Esther, very much like Jezebel, is the daughter of another nation who will be brought in. She will go into the harem. She will become a member, a sexual slave to the king. And then through her diligence to God, through her obedience to God, she will be elevated to the status of queen. But, mark this, like Jezebel, she will be a foreign woman who will be brought in. She will lead the king into obedience to God. This is someone who very much is the antithesis of who Jezebel would be. Esther is not born as the daughter of a king. She has no heirs. She has no claims. She has nothing that she can kind of bring into this marriage. She, in fact, is a sexual slave. So she is the opposite end of the spectrum from Jezebel. But like Jezebel, she will become queen and she will influence the king. How is Jezebel, a foreign woman who comes in and convinces her husband to worship the way that she worships, bad? And how is Esther, who is not part of this nation, also a foreigner, will be brought in and will convince her husband to worship her God? Same story, different purposes. And yet Jezebel is the one who should die because she's evil, wicked, and may her name never be forgotten in that way. Where Esther, doing the exact same things, will be brought in, and she will do the exact same thing that Jezebel does by convincing the king to worship her God. And Esther is somehow elevated. Here, too, the Marxists would say, who is benefiting from this story? Well, it turns out there are different ways in which these stories can be told. We see this specifically in the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. These stories trade on the same names, but they're telling very different political histories. One of these versions will talk about David as the constructor or the architect of the nation of Israel. One of these stories will talk about David as an adulterer, as someone who will violate God's law, will send a man to the front lines of war so that he can have that man's wife. And one of these will talk about the failures of David, not only as a father, but also as a king, who will at one point abandon responsibility for his, well, not at one point, at several points. He will abandon responsibility for his sons, plural. He will leave the throne for a period of time, and he will say that this is the judgment of God. He recognizes that he is under the judgment of God, and then will be restored to the throne because he recognizes that God is not happy with him. That doesn't make sense. No part of those three stories unite with one another, and yet it is presented as this is all one and the same story. I would say, and the Marxist critic would say, that those three versions of the life of David have different audiences, different authors, different understandings, and different ways that we should approach the text. And the Marxists would not say, oh, everyone should be a communist, everyone should be a Marxist. No, the Marxists would say we need to pay attention to where the money is, and we need to be paying attention to where the power is and how those stories are being constructed and for what purposes. Like, how is it trying to warp the audience? How is it trying to bend the audience? How is it using propaganda to shape how the audience will understand itself today and how it understands its past?